Today, we're talking about the most recent roster moves for the Washington Commanders. We're also going to be talking about where the Commanders go from here with the roster as they sit 3-8 in the bye week. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that like, hit that subscribe, and follow the channel as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football daily. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it. And let's start with the most recent roster moves for the Washington Commanders. And so the first move that the Washington Commanders have made is they have gone out and they have signed kicker Jake Moody. And so this was a move that had to happen here for the Washington Commanders as they just recently let go of Matt Gay. And so with Jake Moody, he has had some success already this season against the Washington Commanders, and he's had some success with the Chicago Bears so far this season. And so he's played in 2 games with them. He's 8 of 9 as far as his makes to attempts, and he's hitting 88.9% of his field goals. And he has not attempted anything that has been 50 plus this season. And so his longest this season has been 48. But he has had a solid season thus far. He did play a game with the San Francisco 49ers, and so he had one game where he was 1 of 3, and he started off 33.3% there, and he was 1 of 2 in the range of 30 to 39, and he was also 0 of 1 in 20 to 29 with the San Francisco 49ers. And so in total, 9 of 12 this season for about 75%. So still, much better production than the Washington Commanders were getting this season at the kicking game. And I just think that, you're looking at a player that Adam Peters knows. And so I think that Adam Peters probably feels very comfortable bringing him in, hoping that he can get the production that he needs out of the kicking game. And really, if the Washington Commanders are going to do anything this season, they are going to have to really bring it together on all 3 phases, and really in the special teams game as far as executing, with getting points in the kicking game. It just hasn't been there, and you're going to need that, especially if you don't know what's going to happen with your offense and Jayden Daniels, which we're going to talk about that in a moment. And so you have to be able to play, that complementary football. You don't want to be in situations out there where your offense literally has to continue to keep going for it, or, you have to go ahead and say the offense needs to get some more yards to get this guy closer. And so I think that Jake Moody can make all the kicks that the Washington Commanders need to really make for the stretch run here of this season. And so let's see what happens with Jake Moody. And so that's the latest there as far as the special teams game goes. And so there's been some other moves for the Washington Commanders. And so this is something that was released today via the Twitter here for the Washington Commanders. And so it says that they signed Jacoby Jones to the practice squad, and then they released safety Daryl Worley from the practice squad. And so with Jacoby Jones back to the practice squad, he did get a chance to go out there and actually make his debut against the Miami Dolphins. And so I believe that he did have 1 catch in that game. And so, this is a player that, I would expect for him to probably get some more opportunities with the Washington Commanders, especially with the injuries that this team has really faced at the wide receiver position. And I also think too, at this point in time, like the Washington Commanders really need to evaluate as much talent as possible. And so Jacoby Jones, look, I think that he's done a solid job thus far in the limited time that we've seen him. But I do think that this is a player maybe much like a Treylon Burks you want to take a good look at and see what you have with this player, because maybe you have something here, especially, if you just really don't know what you're going to do, down the stretch with some of your players that are injured at that position. And so next, that leads me into just really what do the Washington Commanders do this season, sitting 3-8, and really who should return, and just really what should this team be focusing on down the stretch of this season. And so, starting with Jayden Daniels, I think that has been one of the biggest questions around the Washington Commanders. I continue to keep seeing that across a lot of just, writers, and then also to other content creators right now around Jayden Daniels, and just really the question, should he come back? And so my opinion on this is that Jayden Daniels has been injured 3 times this season. So he's dealing with the elbow now, he's dealt with the sprained knee, and he's dealt with the hamstring. Jayden Daniels is, just he's a franchise quarterback. We know that this guy is certainly a player that you can win with, you can build around, and everything else. And I just think, look, as a fan that really has just gone through tough times with this team, especially when it came down to quarterback play. Now that you have a franchise quarterback, and now you're at this point in the season where you're 3-8, I get that, everybody out there is a competitor and everything else, but I just think at some point you have to look at the bigger picture, and maybe sitting Jayden Daniels out might be the best scenario for the Washington Commanders at this point in time, even though at 3-8, really, if you think about it, I mean, they could still make a stretch run, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to risk it, with what's going on with this football team, because they have really struggled with injuries. And I'm not sure that you want to put him into that situation out there, with, players that maybe not necessarily are going to be with this roster. I think it's more so in an evaluation standpoint. So Jayden Daniels, I would sit him personally if it's me, but let's see what happens with the Washington Commanders and if they decide to do so. And, also too, another player to think about that maybe I would sit to as well would be Terry McLaurin. I think that here's a player that we know what Terry McLaurin can do, and I'm sure he wants to get back out there and everything else. But at this point in time, though, do you want to rush him back out there and really have him have the chance to get re-injured, and then it's something that kind of goes into the offseason? And I think that that's kind of the same question that I would have around Jayden Daniels, because really, I think that that is kind of where it was a tough start for the Washington Commanders this season. It's just really getting everybody on the field from the start of, these OTAs and everything else, all the way through training camp and everything else. Like, that stuff really matters. And you don't want to have any type of lingering injuries going into the offseason. And so I know it's still a lot of time left, but I'm not necessarily in the camp here, in throwing some of your main pieces back out there on the field with the way that the season is going. And I just think that at this point in time, what really probably has to happen is just the Washington Commanders really need to figure out who's going to be here with this roster moving forward. Because right now, you have the NFL's oldest roster, and you really need to figure out, okay, who do you want to hold on to? And then if they're not going to be here, what adjustments do you need to make with this roster? And so, when you're looking at the running backs here, clearly, you have Bill, you have Chris Rodriguez Jr., you have Jeremy McNichols, like you have, that running back room right now that's pretty much set. And you have to think about, okay, what are you going to do with a guy like Austin Eckler and stuff like that? And then also too, at the wide receiver position, you have a guy like Deebo Samuel. He's going to be a free agent, right? And so you have to figure out, okay, what is the next step there? Because I think that that's something that the Washington Commanders are certainly going to have to figure out, because, I think that you saw some flashes here with Luke McCaffrey. It's unfortunate that he ended up on the IR with the collarbone. Then you also, have to figure out, okay, how do you continue to develop a guy like Jalen Lane? That's another thing that you have to ask yourself. Then what you have with Terry McLaurin. Yes, I know he's getting older, but that is something that you'll have to think about as well. And so, you just need to really figure out what's going on there. And then defensively, you're certainly going to have to figure out what's going on, because, a lot of the players that are on the IR currently right now, defensive players. You have Dietrich Wise Jr., he's on the IR. Marshawn Lattimore, I believe he was in the last year of his deal. He's on the IR. You have Will Harris that hopefully he gets back to the team, right? He was on the IR. And so you have to think about, okay, what are you going to do there? And then it's just like, on top of that, I feel like the Commanders still really need to try to figure out a way to think about their future too as well. And that kind of goes into just really now thinking about, okay, you've given off some of your draft capital. So what are you going to do now in order to try to, replenish the roster in the offseason, hopefully via the draft, because I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to be there via free agency. And so, a lot of questions here with the Washington Commanders, but I'm kind of in the camp right now that you probably need to lean a little bit more on just, I think, the youth movement here and try to figure out what you have with this team and just really see what certain players can do for you on offense and defense when you put them out there in certain situations and things like that. And so still think that the team needs to compete, but I think that that's something that you have to think about. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking with the Washington Commanders and really the direction that they should go sitting 3-8 here. Should they decide to go all in, put everybody back on the field and see what they could do down the stretch here of this NFL season? Or do you think that it comes down to the fact that Adam Peters is really going to have to evaluate this young talent, maybe try to figure out ways in which he's going to get crafty in the offseason here to maybe get some more draft capital and just revamp this roster moving forward? And also let me know what you guys are thinking with the latest roster moves for the Washington Commanders. And so again, looks like that Jake Moody will be the kicker here for the Washington Commanders. And so hopefully a kicker that the Commanders can depend on, because they are certainly going to need just a lot more consistency there in the kicking game and just really across the football team if they are going to make a major turnaround here coming out of the bye. And also too, just talking about a guy like Jacoby Jones, I think that, he's one of those players that I do feel like that you evaluate. You see what you have with these players that maybe you have on the practice squad. Maybe you're bringing them up there and you're going to put them into some major situations down the stretch to see what you got there. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.